Seeds of Fortune. The bell above the shop door jingled as Josephine Baker pushed it open, stepping into the small hardware store that smelled of sawdust and metal. Rain tapped against the windows, providing a gentle rhythm to an otherwise quiet afternoon in the small town of Millfield. "Hello? Anyone here?" she called, shaking droplets from her umbrella. From behind a stack of lumber emerged Nathaniel Hargrove, his shirt sleeves rolled up and hands stained with wood stain. "Sorry about that. Just organizing the new shipment." His smile was warm despite the exhaustion evident in the circles beneath his eyes. Josephine held up her leaking kitchen faucet. "Think you can save me from a flooded apartment?" That chance meeting in 1987 sparked what neither could have predicted. First a friendship, then a romance that blossomed despite Nathaniel's financial struggles. The hardware store barely kept its doors open during the recession, but Josephine saw something in the tall, determined man that went beyond balance sheets. "You'll need to close the store," her father warned 6 months into their relationship. "That Hargrove boy has ambition but no money. Think about your future, Josie." But Josephine had seen Nathaniel sketching designs late into the night, innovative tools that combined functionality with affordability. "He doesn't just sell hardware," she explained. "He understands how to make it better." When they married in a simple ceremony, their wedding gifts included a collection taken up by loyal customers who believed in Nathaniel's vision. With that modest sum and Josephine's savings from her teaching job, they rented a small workshop behind the store. "People thought I was crazy," Nathaniel would later tell business reporters. "Who starts manufacturing when you can barely keep a retail store afloat?" But Josephine believed in me. The Hard Tools' patented wrench system changed everything. Its adjustable grip and ergonomic design caught the attention of a regional distributor. Within 3 years, Nathaniel's invention was in hardware stores across the Midwest. "We should move to Chicago," he suggested one evening as they sat at their kitchen table, surrounded by purchase orders. "The business needs to expand." Josephine looked around their modest home, thinking of her teaching position and the community they'd built. "If that's what's needed," she said simply, squeezing his hand. The sacrifice was the first of many. As Nathaniel's business acumen grew, so did his company. Hard Tools expanded into power equipment, then construction supplies, and eventually commercial development. Josephine left teaching to manage the growing administrative demands, working alongside her husband as they built an empire from that tiny hardware store. When Nathaniel's brother Trevor learned of their success, he suddenly appeared after years of silence. "Family should stick together," he announced, proposing partnerships and suggesting roles for himself within the company. "Be careful," Josephine whispered to Nathaniel that night. "He never believed in you before." But Nathaniel's heart was generous. "He's my brother. Everyone deserves a second chance." That philosophy extended to his cousin Patricia, his uncle William, and various in-laws who emerged as Hard Tools became Hargrove Industries, a corporation valued at over $300 million by its 20th anniversary. Nathaniel welcomed them all, providing jobs, opportunities, and financial support. Only Josephine remembered the lean years, the missed meals, the late nights working by lamplight when they couldn't afford the electricity bill, the bank meetings where loan officers laughed at Nathaniel's proposals. Only she had stood beside him when standing seemed impossible. "You're too trusting," she would sometimes caution as relatives requested advances on salaries or temporary loans. Nathaniel would simply smile. "Success means nothing if you can't share it, Joe." What neither realized was how quickly sharing could become expectation, and how swiftly gratitude could transform into entitlement. The seeds of fortune were planted in love and watered with determination. But even the strongest gardens can attract those who wish only to harvest without contributing to the growth. Golden shadows. The marble floors of Hargrove Industries headquarters gleamed under chandelier light as Josephine crossed the lobby. 25 years had transformed their company from a workshop dream to a corporate giant with offices in 14 countries. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed, but Josephine still felt like the same woman who once helped customers find the right nail size in a dusty hardware store. "Mrs. Hargrove," the receptionist called. "Mr. Trevor Hargrove asked to see you when you arrived." Josephine suppressed a sigh. "Tell him I'll be there after I check on Nathaniel." Her husband's corner office offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline, but these days Nathaniel spent less time admiring the view and more time rubbing his temples against persistent headaches. She found him standing at the window, his once dark hair now streaked with silver. "The board approved Trevor's resort project," he said without turning around. "50 million in development funds." Josephine placed a hand on his shoulder. "Despite your reservations? He's been working here for 15 years. Joe. He deserves a chance to lead something significant." What Nathaniel didn't mention was how Trevor had circumvented his brother's authority, lobbying board members individually until he secured enough votes. The subtle power shifts had begun years ago, when Hargrove Industries went public and family members acquired significant shares. "The Henderson contract needs your signature," Josephine said, changing the subject. The construction company had been their first major client, back when they couldn't afford proper business cards. Now the owner's son was expanding into Asia, and still insisted on Nathaniel's personal involvement. "Some relationships stand the test of time," Nathaniel mused, signing the papers. "Speaking of which, we should prepare for Sunday's family dinner." The monthly tradition had begun as an intimate gathering, but expanded as the family did. Josephine spent Saturday cooking Nathaniel's favorite dishes, while he selected wines from their cellar. Their childlessness, a private sorrow they'd come to accept, meant their large home often felt empty except during these gatherings on Sunday, arrived with a parade of luxury vehicles pulling into their circular driveway. Trevor emerged from his Bentley with his third wife, Vanessa, a former model who wore diamonds even to casual family events. Patricia and her husband followed in a Range Rover, their teenage children immediately disappearing into the house to raid the entertainment room Nathaniel had built specifically for them. Uncle Nate called William's son Marcus, a vice president of marketing despite being only 28. "Have you considered my proposal about the European expansion?" Before Nathaniel could answer, Trevor interjected. "We discussed that in Thursday's executive meeting. The board feels Asia should be our priority." "Actually," Nathaniel said mildly, "I think Marcus's ideas have merit. We should explore both options." The subtle tension was broken by Josephine announcing dinner. Around the massive oak table, purchased with Nathaniel's first $1 million contract, 18 relatives gathered, none of whom had been present during the company's difficult early years. "A toast," Trevor stood, raising his glass, "to Hargrove Industries and its continued success under our family's guidance." Josephine noticed the careful wording, not celebrating Nathaniel specifically, but claiming collective ownership of his accomplishments. She glanced at her husband, wondering if he caught the nuance, but his expression remained genial. "And to Josephine," Nathaniel added, "who makes these gatherings feel like home." Trevor's wife gave a tight smile. "Yes, such lovely homemade food. Though you really should consider hiring staff at this point." The comment stung more than it should have. Josephine had refused household help despite their wealth, preferring to maintain the personal touches that made their house a home. But Vanessa's words reflected a growing sentiment among the family, that Josephine was somehow insufficient for the lifestyle their money afforded. After dessert, the men retreated to Nathaniel's study while the women gathered in the sunroom. Patricia's daughters showed off new designer purchases while discussing their upcoming Mediterranean cruise, funded by their Hargrove Industries dividends. "Josephine," Patricia said with practiced casualness, "we were surprised you weren't at the charity gala last week. The family was being honored." "Nathaniel wasn't feeling well," she replied simply. Vanessa exchanged glances with Patricia. Trevor represented the family beautifully. The press loved him. The unspoken message was clear. Trevor was becoming the public face of Hargrove Industries while Nathaniel receded into the background. More concerning to Josephine was her husband's recurring health issues, which the family seemed to regard as inconvenient rather than worrying. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Nathaniel winced while removing his watch. "The pain's worse, isn't it?" Josephine asked quietly. He nodded reluctantly. "Dr. Richardson wants more tests. You should step back from daily operations until we know what's wrong." Nathaniel sighed. The company has taken enough," Josephine interrupted, a rare firmness in her voice. "Your health matters more than quarterly reports." He nodded reluctantly. "Dr. Richardson wants more tests. You should step back from daily operations until we know what's wrong. Nathaniel sighed. The company has taken enough, Josephine interrupted, a rare firmness in her voice. Your health matters more than quarterly reports. What she didn't say was how she'd noticed Trevor already moving files from Nathaniel's office, or how board members now called him directly instead of her husband. The golden success they'd built was casting longer shadows, and Josephine feared what might be lurking within them. As Nathaniel finally fell asleep, Josephine watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest, remembering the young man who'd once worked until his hands bled to make their dreams come true. The fortune he'd built was changing everyone around him. Yet he remained fundamentally the same generous soul, perhaps dangerously so. Whispers of illness. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday morning, delivered in the sterile confines of Dr. Richardson's office. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. Josephine gripped Nathaniel's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white, while he received the news with the same quiet dignity he'd shown throughout his life. What are our options? Nathaniel asked, his voice steady despite the sentence hovering in the air between them. Dr. Richardson, who had been their physician for over a decade, removed his glasses. Treatment can extend quality time, but I need to be honest. We're not looking at a cure situation. Nathaniel. The drive home passed in silence. Chicago's skyline, including the Hargrove Tower they'd built 5 years earlier, standing as monuments to a future Nathaniel might not fully share. When they finally spoke, it wasn't about death or regrets. We need to be strategic about the announcement, Nathaniel said, practical even now. The company stock will take a hit. The company, Josephine whispered, a rare edge to her voice. Is that really your concern right now? Nathaniel reached across the car's console to take her hand. It's not just a company, Joe, it's our legacy. It's the livelihood of over 5,000 employees. We have responsibilities. That evening, they called an emergency meeting of the executive team, limited to Trevor, Patricia, Marcus, and the non-family CFO, Diane Wong. Josephine watched their faces as Nathaniel calmly explained his condition and the 6 to 8 month prognosis. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Patricia gasped dramatically, though Josephine noticed her gaze darting to Trevor rather than focusing on Nathaniel. Marcus appeared genuinely shaken, having always looked to his uncle as a mentor. And Trevor's expression flashed through shock, concern, and something else Josephine couldn't quite name before settling into appropriately somber lines. This stays confidential for now, Nathaniel instructed. We'll create a succession plan before making any public statements. Trevor leaned forward. Have you considered who will take over as CEO? The question hung in the air like a vulture, circling before its meal was even cold. Josephine felt a surge of anger, but Nathaniel merely nodded. The board will need to vote, of course, but we have time to ensure a smooth transition. Later that night, Josephine found Nathaniel in his home office, surrounded by legal documents. You should be resting, she said softly. There's too much to organize, he replied, rubbing his eyes. Too many people depending on the right decisions. The news spread through the family within days, despite the request for confidentiality. Suddenly, the house that had felt too large was constantly filled with relatives bearing casseroles and concerned expressions. Josephine noted how conversations would halt when she entered rooms, how family members seemed to be conducting inventories of artwork and antiques with their eyes. We're thinking of moving the family dinner to our house next month, Vanessa told Josephine in the kitchen, her voice honey-sweet, to give you a break from hosting during this difficult time. That won't be necessary, Josephine replied. The routine gives Nathaniel comfort. Vanessa's smile tightened. Trevor mentioned that the household staff question has become urgent. He's compiled a list of agencies. We don't need staff, Josephine said firmly, though exhaustion pulled at her shoulders after nights of monitoring Nathaniel's increasing pain. Josephine, Vanessa lowered her voice. You need to consider appearances. The Hargrove name carries expectations. Trevor will soon be. She stopped abruptly. Will soon be what? Josephine asked. Naturally more involved in supporting you both, Vanessa finished smoothly. That same afternoon, Josephine overheard Trevor and Patricia in the garden. The Singapore project is perfect for repositioning the company, Trevor was saying. Once the transition happens, we'll need to move quickly. What about her? Patricia asked, and Josephine knew immediately who her referred to. She's never had any real authority in the company. The board respects her dedication, but they know she doesn't have the business acumen to. Josephine quietly retreated, unwilling to hear more. For 28 years, she had managed the company's operations alongside Nathaniel, handling everything from payroll to international contracts during the early growth years. Her signature appeared alongside his on the founding documents. Yet to his family, she was merely the loyal wife, a role they clearly believed would diminish with Nathaniel's health. Meanwhile, Nathaniel grew thinner, the aggressive treatments taking their toll. Still, 3 times a week, he insisted on going to the office, where Josephine would find him mentoring younger employees or reviewing designs for new product lines that he might never see completed. "You need to prepare yourself," Trevor told her one evening while Nathaniel dozed in the next room. "The company will require strong leadership in the coming years." "Nathaniel isn't gone yet," Josephine replied sharply. Trevor had the grace to look abashed. "Of course not. But he's been meeting with Graham Whitfield." The name of their longtime attorney sent a chill through Josephine. "What meetings?" "Estate planning, I assume. Perfectly natural under the circumstances." What wasn't natural was how these meetings occurred when Josephine was managing Nathaniel's medical appointments. 3 times now she'd returned home to find Graham leaving, his briefcase clutched tightly as he offered vague explanations about standard documentation. That night, while helping Nathaniel with his medication, she finally asked, "What are the meetings with Graham about?" Nathaniel took her hand, his once strong fingers now painfully thin. "Just making sure everything is in order, Joe, don't worry." "Shouldn't I be involved?" He smiled faintly. "Trust me, I'm taking care of everything." The words should have been comforting, but as Nathaniel's health deteriorated, Josephine couldn't shake the feeling that decisions were being made without her. The family circled closer, Trevor practically moving into an office adjacent to Nathaniel's, while Patricia began appearing at board meetings as an observer. At the next family dinner, fewer dishes were eaten, more business was discussed, and Josephine noticed how the conversation shifted whenever she approached. A distance was growing, not just between her and the family, but worryingly between her and Nathaniel himself, as though his illness had created a gulf she couldn't cross. When she found medication for pain she hadn't been told about, she confronted him gently. "Why didn't you tell me it was getting worse?" "You have enough to worry about," he said, his voice weaker than the week before. "Besides, the changes at the company need attention." "The company," she repeated, the words suddenly bitter on her tongue. "Is that all that matters now?" Nathaniel looked at her with surprise. "Of course not. But it needs to survive beyond me, for everyone's sake. Including hers, he didn't say. But Josephine wondered, watching the family's machinations, whether there would be a place for her in the future they were already planning. A future measured not in love or loyalty, but in stock options and executive titles. The secret testament autumn painted the trees outside Nathaniel's hospital room in fiery hues, a stark contrast to the clinical white walls surrounding him. 4 months had passed since the diagnosis, and the cancer had moved more aggressively than even Dr. Richardson had predicted. Josephine sat beside the bed, reading aloud from Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, Nathaniel's favorite since college. A soft knock interrupted her reading. Graham Whitfield entered, his silver hair immaculately combed, leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "I can come back," he offered, seeing Nathaniel asleep. Josephine closed the book. "He's been sleeping more often now." "What do you need, Graham?" The attorney hesitated. "Just some final signatures. Perhaps we could step outside?" "Whatever you need to discuss with my husband, you can say in front of me." Graham's discomfort was palpable. Nathaniel requested certain confidentiality around these particular documents. Before Josephine could respond, Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open. "Graham," he whispered, voice raspy. "Is it ready?" "Yes, everything as you instructed." Josephine stood. "I'll give you privacy." "Thank you, Joe," Nathaniel said, his eyes communicating something she couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Resolve? The morphine made his expressions increasingly difficult to read. In the hallway, Josephine leaned against the wall, fighting the urge to cry. 28 years of marriage, of building a life and company together, and now secrets lay between them like uninvited guests. Whatever Nathaniel was planning, he had chosen not to share it with her. Mrs. Hargrove? She turned to find Trevor approaching, his designer suit impeccable despite the late hour. The board meeting went well, he said, his voice carefully modulated to hospital-appropriate tones. We've drafted the transition announcement for when... He cleared his throat. For when the time comes. Nathaniel is still CEO, Josephine reminded him sharply. Trevor nodded, the perfect picture of deference. Of course. This is merely preparation. Diane suggested we be proactive to prevent market instability. Before she could respond, Graham emerged from Nathaniel's room, nodding briskly to them both before hurrying toward the elevators. What was Whitfield doing here? Trevor asked, his casual tone belied by the intensity in his eyes. Legal matters, Josephine replied vaguely, unwilling to admit her own ignorance. Trevor's phone chimed. He glanced at it, then back at Josephine with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. You should get some rest. Patricia can sit with him tonight. I'm not leaving, Josephine said firmly. Something flickered across Trevor's face, frustration quickly masked by concern. You've barely slept in weeks. This isn't what Nathaniel would want. The words struck deeper than Trevor could know. What did Nathaniel want? Once she would have said she knew his mind better than anyone. Now, with secret meetings and documents she wasn't permitted to see, Josephine felt adrift in uncertainty. The following week brought a temporary rally in Nathaniel's condition, enough for a brief return home. The house had been modified with hospital equipment and a full-time nurse, but for a few precious days they could pretend normalcy existed. On his second night home, Josephine found Nathaniel in his study, laboriously writing in a leather-bound journal. You should be resting, she chided gently. He closed the book as she approached. Some things need to be said while I still can. Josephine sat beside him on the leather sofa. You can say anything to me. Nathaniel took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band she'd worn since their wedding, back when gold had been an extravagance they could barely afford. Do you remember when we couldn't make rent on the store? He asked suddenly. That winter when the heating failed? She nodded. We slept in the back room with that little space heater, using inventory boxes as furniture. You never complained. Not once. His eyes, though clouded with medication, found hers with startling clarity. Even when your father offered you an escape route. The memory surfaced. Her father's stern face as he'd laid out a check, enough to leave Nathaniel and start fresh. She'd torn it up without hesitation. There was nothing to escape from, she said simply. Nathaniel smiled faintly. The company board met yesterday. The abrupt change of subject disoriented her. Trevor mentioned it. They voted on the succession plan. Josephine's heart tightened. And? Trevor will be named CEO upon my departure. The clinical word hung between them. It was unanimous. She fought to keep her expression neutral. I see. It's the logical choice, Joe. He has the experience, the business school credentials. What he didn't say, what didn't need saying, was that Josephine had none of these things. Her contributions had always been behind the scenes, invisible to those who measured value in degrees and titles. Is that what your meetings with Graham have been about? The succession? Nathaniel's gaze dropped to their intertwined hands. Partly. The partial truth hurt more than a lie. What aren't you telling me, Nate? For a moment it seemed he might finally confide in her. Then the nurse appeared in the doorway, announcing it was time for medication. The moment shattered, never to be recaptured. As Nathaniel's condition deteriorated again, the family's presence in their home increased. Patricia practically moved into the guest room, while Trevor conducted business calls from Nathaniel's study. Josephine found herself increasingly sidelined, treated as a peripheral figure in her own home. We've arranged for the company's winter gala to honor Nathaniel, Vanessa informed her over coffee one morning. The board thinks it would be good for morale. He's too ill for public events, Josephine protested. Of course he won't attend, Vanessa said, as though explaining to a child. Trevor will accept the recognition on his behalf. Each day brought new indignities, relatives cataloging art pieces for insurance purposes, financial advisors arriving to meet with Trevor rather than her, board members calling to discuss continuity plans that somehow never included Josephine. Graham Whitfield continued his visits, always when Josephine was occupied elsewhere. Twice she returned to find him leaving Nathaniel's room, documents tucked securely in his briefcase. The third time she confronted him directly. "Whatever you're doing, I should be involved." Graham's professional demeanor never wavered. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Hargrove, but I'm bound by client confidentiality. I'm his wife, and Nathaniel is my client," he replied gently but firmly. "He's given me specific instructions." The implication was clear. Nathaniel didn't want her involved in whatever arrangements were being made. The realization cut deeper than any betrayal she could have imagined. That night, while organizing Nathaniel's medications, she discovered the leather journal hidden beneath his pillows. Her fingers hovered over the cover, temptation warring with respect for his privacy. In the end, she simply returned it to its hiding place, uncertain whether her decision stemmed from integrity or fear of what she might discover. As November faded into December, so too did Nathaniel's strength. The doctor spoke of comfort measures now rather than treatment options. Family members began flying in from across the country. Distant cousins who had never before shown interest in Nathaniel's life, but suddenly appeared deeply concerned about his legacy. Trevor orchestrated everything with efficient precision: medical consultations, family visits, even the rotation of staff caring for Nathaniel. To outsiders, his devotion might have seemed admirable, but Josephine saw how these arrangements systematically reduced her role, how decisions were communicated to her rather than made with her. "We should discuss funeral arrangements," Trevor said one evening. His voice lowered as though Nathaniel couldn't hear them from the next room. "The board wants to ensure it reflects the company's stature." "Nathaniel has already made those plans," Josephine replied, though in truth they had never discussed it. Some lies were necessary shields against encroachment. On a snowy December morning, Graham arrived with what he described as final documents. This time, he requested Josephine's presence. Nathaniel insisted, he explained when she expressed surprise. In the quiet of their bedroom, with Nathaniel propped up against pillows, Graham placed a sealed envelope on the bedside table. "This contains instructions to be followed after." He paused delicately. "After the time comes. It should not be opened until then." Nathaniel's hand found Josephine's, squeezing with what little strength remained. "Promise me, Joe, no matter what happens." "I promise," she whispered, though uncertainty clouded her understanding of what exactly she was promising. As Graham departed, Josephine noticed Trevor watching from the hallway, his expression unreadable. The envelope sat on the nightstand like a harbinger of what was to come. A future shaped by decisions she hadn't been party to, in a world transformed by absence. That night, as snow blanketed Chicago in pristine white, Josephine kept vigil beside her husband's bed. The house was finally quiet, the relatives having departed for their hotels. In the stillness, with only the rhythmic beep of medical equipment as company, she finally asked the question that had haunted her for months. "Why all the secrets, Nate?" His eyes opened slowly, finding hers with effort.
"Not secrets," he whispered.
"Protection." Before she could ask what he meant, his breathing deepened into sleep, leaving Josephine alone with her thoughts and the mysterious envelope that would determine their legacy. The true inheritor January arrived with bitter winds sweeping off Lake Michigan, bringing the inevitable news that even the most advanced medical science could not prevent. Nathaniel Hargrove passed away peacefully in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, Josephine's hand clasped in his until the final moment. The days that followed passed in a blur of arrangements and condolences. Trevor took charge with practiced efficiency, coordinating with the funeral home while Patricia managed the flood of floral arrangements and sympathy cards. Josephine moved through these days like a ghost in her own home, her grief a private thing that found no expression in the business-like atmosphere that had overtaken their residence. "The Chicago Tribune wants a statement," Trevor informed her over breakfast. 3 days after Nathaniel's passing. "I've drafted something appropriate." Josephine looked up from her untouched toast. "I'd like to see it first." Trevor slid a printed document across the table. The statement portrayed Nathaniel primarily as a visionary businessman and spoke of his cherished family carrying forward his legacy. Nowhere did it mention his humble beginnings, his personal values, or the decades of partnership with Josephine. "This isn't who he was," she said quietly, pushing the paper back. Trevor's smile tightened. It's who the public needs him to have been. The company's stability depends on projecting strength and continuity. The company, Josephine echoed hollowly. Always the company. The funeral was a grand affair held at Chicago's historic Fourth Presbyterian Church. Business leaders, politicians, and celebrities mingled with family members, many of whom Josephine recognized only from occasional holiday cards. She sat in the front pew, flanked by Trevor and Patricia, feeling oddly displaced at what should have been the most personal of ceremonies. Each eulogy emphasized Nathaniel's business acumen, his market insights, his philanthropic contributions. None spoke of his kindness to employees, his habit of remembering birthdays, or how he had once spent an entire night helping a warehouse worker move apartments during a snowstorm. The Nathaniel being memorialized was a corporate titan, not the man she had loved for nearly 3 decades. Following the service, the family gathered at the Hargrove estate for a reception that felt more like a networking event than a wake. Josephine retreated to the kitchen, finding unexpected solace in practical tasks until Graham Whitfield appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said quietly, "if you're able, we should address the matter of the will." Trevor materialized beside him. "Perhaps we should wait until tomorrow. Today has been trying enough." Graham looked to Josephine. "Nathaniel left specific instructions that the reading should occur today." She nodded, suddenly remembering the envelope still sitting untouched on her nightstand. "Let me get something first." In the bedroom that now felt too large without Nathaniel's presence, Josephine retrieved the sealed envelope. Whatever it contained, final words, instructions, explanations for the secrecy, it represented his last communication to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to find the family assembled in the living room. 32 relatives sat expectantly as Graham arranged documents on the coffee table. Josephine took a seat slightly apart from the others, the envelope clutched in her lap. Trevor stood beside the fireplace, perfectly positioned to assume the visual role of family patriarch. "Before we begin," Graham announced, "Nathaniel requested that this be played." He produced a small digital recorder and pressed play. Nathaniel's voice filled the room, weaker than in his prime, but still carrying the quiet authority that had defined him. "If you're hearing this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. First, my deepest love to Josephine, who has been my foundation through every storm. To my family, I appreciate the roles you've played in building what began as a simple dream into an enterprise that supports thousands of families." Trevor nodded solemnly, as though accepting personal acknowledgement. "Business success can be measured in stock prices and market share," Nathaniel's voice continued. "But a life can only be measured by the loyalty shown when no reward was promised, and the love given when no advantage could be gained." A subtle shifting moved through the room as relatives exchanged glances, perhaps sensing the direction of his words. "With that understanding, I've made decisions that may surprise some of you. Graham will explain the details, but know that each choice reflects careful consideration of who stood beside me, not just in prosperity, but in the days when success seemed impossible." The recording ended. Graham cleared his throat and opened a leather portfolio. "The last will and testament of Nathaniel James Hargrove," he began formally, "regarding Hargrove Industries, my controlling interest, comprising 47% of company shares valued at approximately $1.2 billion, is bequeathed in its entirety to the Hargrove Foundation, a newly established charitable entity." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Trevor's knuckles whitened as he gripped the mantelpiece. "The foundation will operate under a board of directors selected from company employees who have served for 10 or more years. With the exception of the chairperson," Graham continued, "the position of foundation chairperson, with full voting control of my shares, is appointed to Josephine Eleanor Hargrove to serve for as long as she wishes." Josephine's breath caught. Trevor took an involuntary step forward. "This cannot be legal," he protested. "The company bylaws were amended 6 months ago," Graham interrupted smoothly. "The board approved the changes unanimously." Josephine remembered the board meeting Nathaniel had mentioned, the one where Trevor had been named successor. What her husband hadn't revealed was the simultaneous restructuring that preserved Josephine's control over the company's direction. Regarding personal assets, Graham continued over the murmuring that had broken out. The Hargrove residence and all properties are bequeathed to Josephine Hargrove, along with all personal accounts, investments, and possessions. Patricia's face flushed crimson. But what about the family? What do we receive? Graham adjusted his glasses. Mr. Hargrove has provided a separate document addressing that question. He handed Josephine a sealed envelope identical to the one in her lap. With steady hands, she opened it and found a single sheet of paper with Nathaniel's handwriting. To my family, I leave you exactly what you gave me during my struggles. Nothing. To those who joined only after success was assured, I leave this lesson. True wealth lies in loyalty, not opportunism. Josephine passed the note to Graham, who read it aloud. The silence that followed was absolute until Trevor broke it. This is spiteful and unnecessary, he said, voice tight with controlled rage. We've dedicated years to the company's growth. This will be contested. Mr. Hargrove anticipated that response, Graham noted calmly. The will includes a clause that any relative who contests any portion forfeits their company positions and existing stock options. The strategic brilliance of Nathaniel's planning became clear. The family members employed by Hargrove Industries, nearly all of them, faced an impossible choice. Accept receiving nothing from his personal fortune or lose their lucrative corporate positions. As realization dawned across shocked faces, Josephine finally opened the envelope Nathaniel had given her months before. Inside was not a legal document but a letter, written in the increasingly unsteady hand of his final days. My dearest Joe, by now Graham has explained the arrangements. The family will be angry, but remember this was never about punishment, it was about protection. Protecting you, and protecting the company we built together from those who value profit over people. They joined us for the harvest but never helped with the planting. You alone stood beside me when the ground was barren and the future uncertain. You alone believed when belief seemed foolish. The foundation will continue our work supporting education for underprivileged children, the dream we discussed when we couldn't afford to have children of our own. And you, my love, will ensure the company remembers its soul wasn't built in boardrooms, but in that little hardware store where we first began. Some will call this decision unfair. Perhaps it is, but fairness would have been impossible to calculate. How do you measure loyalty against opportunism? How do you quantify love against convenience? I chose simplicity instead, everything to the one person who wanted nothing but me, with eternal love, Nathaniel. Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she carefully refolded the letter. Around her, relatives argued with Graham about legal technicalities while Trevor paced before the fireplace, already calculating his next move. Diane Wong, who had slipped in quietly during the reading, approached Josephine. The executive team is meeting tomorrow morning. As foundation chair, your input would be valued. Josephine nodded, newfound resolve strengthening her voice. I'll be there. As the gathering dissolved into scattered groups of disgruntled relatives, Josephine stepped outside onto the snow-covered terrace. The Chicago skyline glittered in the distance, Hargrove Tower standing tallest among the buildings. Beyond the property's edge, she could see the lake, its waters dark beneath winter ice. In that moment, she understood what Nathaniel had truly left her, not just wealth or control, but purpose. The company they'd built together would continue its success, but with the foundation ensuring it never lost sight of the values that had guided its creation. Trevor appeared beside her, his anger now masked behind a conciliatory smile. We should discuss how to move forward, Josephine. The company still needs strong leadership. She turned to face him, snow catching in her hair. Yes, it does. I'll see you at tomorrow's meeting. You don't intend to actually run things? His surprise was genuine. The foundation role is ceremonial. The company needs to remember where it came from, Josephine interrupted gently. And I'm the only one left who was there at the beginning. As Trevor retreated inside, Josephine remained in the quiet snowfall, feeling Nathaniel's presence in the peace that had settled over her. The path ahead would not be easy. Corporate politics rarely were, but she carried with her the certainty that came from decades of standing firm through challenges. In the end, Nathaniel's true legacy wasn't measured in dollars or stock options, but in the wisdom of recognizing that genuine loyalty is the rarest form of wealth. And in a world where everything could be bought and sold, He had ensured that the one thing that couldn't be purchased, true devotion, was the only currency that ultimately mattered.